filmmaker. I'm a big documentary guy, and we got two really important ones from State of Mind, The Psychology of Control, and A Noble Lie, the Oklahoma City bombing documentary about those events. And today we're with Chris Emery from Free Mind Films, which is responsible for both of these films. So I just want to thank Chris for being with me today.
Thanks a lot, Ricky. I appreciate the invite. It's always an honor.
Yeah, awesome. I'm a huge fan of these films, and I say that often, but usually that only makes sense. I have people on the show that I'm a fan of, but these two films are really important because, one, I think that, especially with my generation, with 9/11 being such a event that we remember, I think Oklahoma City bombing gets kind of put on back of the bus. It kind of gets forgotten a little bit, and I think that it's an important event because it kind of getting into it. It reminds us that they are capable of doing events like this. And then maybe when you look into that, people who are maybe 9/11 deniers or people who still have a hard time believing that the U.S. government either let it happen or had a hand in it, maybe seeing history and repeat, will help them kind of consume the idea that maybe things aren't what they seem. And then that's where it gets into State of Mind, which is another great film because it gets right to the root of basically the people who have molded and the techniques, the psychological techniques to control people and brainwash people. We use that term a lot, brainwashing, but that film really gets into it. It gets right into history. And you have some great people in that film. You have Alex Jones is in it. You have Edward Griffin, the author who did the very popular Creatures from Jekyll Island about the Fed and the Federal Reserve Act. You got Richard Grove from Tragedy and Hope, which a lot of people who probably listen to my show know his work and know his website. And you got John Rappaport, the investigating reporter. You have Anthony Schaff. I'm going to say his name wrong. Schaffer. Am I saying that right?
Anthony Schaefer, yes.
Schaefer, that's what it is. Yeah, and he was a part of the Able Danger. He was a whistleblower who came out, and he was a part of the investigating the hijackers in 9/11, and basically came out and wanted to let people know that they should have never even been let on the plane. And so that's a really interesting story within itself. And he wrote the book Dark Heart about his experience, and which I believe that the U.S. government actually bought a bunch of copies and like burned them or destroyed them or something like that, which is...
That was the first run, yes. I'm not sure if the publisher actually had a second run, but he did share some of that with us. You're right, Ricky. It's the Oklahoma City bombing movie. We wanted to put that together because there was just an inordinate, just a preponderance of evidence to show that the official narrative simply didn't make sense. Just on its face, legally, factually, and morally, it was bankrupt. And it's really sad. I mean, when I first got into this project back in 2000, there was a young gal that I had talked to. She wanted me to help her be a mentor for her in film school down in Fort Worth, where I was living. And she says, "How can anybody remember the deaths of those people in a lie?" And that just stuck with me. I mean, almost that was a seminal statement to really help me stay focused on what we were doing. This wasn't a conspiracy theory movie. It was simply a matter of, as my dad said, you have the Ben Franklin close. You get a sheet of paper and you draw a line down the middle. And you go with the biggest list of which to help you make a decision on which way to move. And the list on the left side of that paper that I wrote down, and I'm being literal. This is what I did. It's very simple, just bare bones. You put down a list of, okay, what supports the official narrative and what doesn't support the official narrative of this particular case. And I couldn't come up with anything. That left-hand column was empty, other than the fact that 169 people were brutally murdered that day, including 3 unborns. I couldn't put anything on that list other than that to support the official narrative. So on the right column, I started writing down, I came up with about 45 things, both from the blast pattern to the damage, to the eyewitness accounts, to search and rescue, to law enforcement, local, county, state, and federal law enforcement, as well as retired members of the CIA and the Oklahoma State counterpart to the FBI, the OSBI. People were coming out of the woodwork, little by little, whether it be by email, anonymously, directly, coming up to me at 7-Elevens when I'm filling up at gas stations or at dinners or at basketball games, saying, "Look, can I help you with this film? I can't come out and say this outright. I've got my job, my pension." I mean, you hear the whole script over and over again. And these are complete strangers. They don't talk to one another. They've never met each other, but they're coming up with basically a train of thought, a series of of evidence, of sightings and so forth that are consistent to the core. And that's what we had to go with. And then the struggle was we got so much information. I mean, we shot 6.5 hours of footage of interviews over the course of about 2.5 years once we really buckled down and started this film. And he says, well, what are you going to do with 6.5 hours of footage? We had to narrow it down to 2 hours. That's pretty much a benchmark in Hollywood. If you want to get your movie released, an hour and 45 minutes to 2 hours. And we hit that 2 hour mark by within 8 seconds. And the other footage that we have is we're going to roll that into what is called the director's cut. I mean, there was so much good information in their interviews we simply had to cut out. And then to get back to your story, it's like, okay, yes, that's why we came up with State of Mind Psychology of Control, because we were getting so much information, people from Moscow, from Scandinavia, from Alaska, from Canada, emailing us and saying, why didn't people ask questions about this film? That's a great question in and of itself. And it says, okay, there is a psychology, there is the cognitive dissonance, as you know. You know, you're wide awake, you could see this stuff as a third party and understand what's going on. So that's why we had to delve into the details and to get a historical perspective of, okay, how are we controlled literally from the minute we are born till the minute we die? I mean, it's a finite amount of time, whether it be 40 years or, 2 years or 80 years or whatever. There is a controlled mechanism, even though we may not realize it. It's more covert versus overt. And then that's what we tried to lay out in the second film. And we've been very blessed. We got a lot of good feedback. The sales have been just absolutely phenomenal. And our film agent and a distributor in LA and in New York have said, wow, we're going to get this out. We love your work. And then they access to option our next 4 films. So again, we're very blessed. We never took any of this for granted.
Yeah, it's funny because I never forget the Oklahoma City bombing because it happened on my birthday. I was born April 19th, and it's weird because a lot of weird events happen around in April, especially that week, and
right.
Around 18th and 19th and the 20th, and a lot of obviously Waco and stuff like that, and the Columbine shooting, and
sure.
And it just seems like a lot of events. So it was almost like even at a young age because these events happen around my birthday or on my birthday, like this event. I was always intrigued to get to the bottom of it and to figure out what happened. Like, would this happen on my birthday? I guess it sounds silly. Like I was only intrigued in it because it happened on my birthday. But at a young age, I looked into it and it helped me. I think if maybe I was born on a different birthday, like I said, it sounds silly. But if I was born on a different birthday, maybe I wouldn't be I wouldn't be aware so quickly or so early in my life. Like I started looking into it, and the Oklahoma City bombing was one of those things where it was weird because I remember it because I was young enough where I kind of remember all the talk about it on the news and stuff like that. But the thing I remember the most was the feeling I had, and that's I was so afraid of like leaving the house and going to the mall and or just going anywhere publicly, and because I didn't quite understand what was going on, and actually, my parents are from another country where I was born in Portugal. So, like, just being born in Portugal, my parents don't really pay attention to the news too much. So they weren't really talking about it much. So I really didn't have anybody to tell me, hey, don't worry about it. We're safe. So I was really afraid. And as I got older, I started looking back and I'm just like, you know what? They used that to basically get us into wars. They did it on September 11th. They get people when their emotions are at their height, and you can convince them to think emotionally and not logically, and jump into things. And that's I can kind of see how you pass laws after events like that, and so what. With all your information, and I'm sure that, like you said, there's tons of information, and I'm sure it was really hard to figure out what you were going to put in the movie and what you weren't. But what was the strongest evidence, or what was the first piece of the puzzle that made you think, holy shit, there's more to the story?
Oh, it's a good question. And by the way, if I may ask, what year were you born, Ricky?
85.
Okay, so you were actually 10 years. You're 10 years old when the bombing happened.
Yeah.
Okay, and I'll bring that up in a historical perspective and why this story continues to live. I mean, it hasn't gone away. It hasn't, gathered mold and dust in the corner and blown away. But to answer your question, my background, I went to University of Wisconsin in Madison, civil engineer, environmental design. I studied statics and strengths and moments of stress in commercial buildings and bridges. So strictly from the engineering standpoint, I said, no, this isn't making any sense. Number one, if there's a top 5 reasons to go with is lack of symmetrical blast pattern. when you have a blast emanating from whether it be a truck or whatever, a wood crate or, in the back of a pickup, you have a symmetrical blast pattern. There was no symmetrical blast pattern in that damage area. And that was time and time and time again. We had Oklahoma County Sheriffs. We had EMSA, the Search and Rescue. We had the fire department, members of the Oklahoma City Police Department and the State Highway Patrol that were down there. There were 23 different fire departments and search and rescue entities on that crime scene within 8 hours. Their struggle was to have organization. Everybody wanted to help, but it was literally just a massive catastrophe. There were the walking wounded. There were people still alive that were buried under the rubble, and all of them, everybody that we talked to that came forward on all of those agencies and levels of law enforcement, said that there were devices strapped to the columns, ready to blow up at 9:12. The initial blast went off at 9:02. And I asked a former military CID officer, Criminal Investigation Division, the Army's version of the FBI, and right now you see it on TV nowadays is NCIS. Well, it's a CID, and he worked in Vietnam for 18 years doing after-action reports on damages, bombing raids and so forth, or guerrilla raids against the Viet Cong, and vice versa, to see what the enemy, what kind of damage they sustained to us. He showed up on that crime scene, and we found out through a third party that he said, yeah, there was definitely contact charges on those columns. And I said, why 9:02? And he says, because you have your target set to go off at 9 o'clock. You give yourself a 2-minute buffer to get the hell out of there. Whether, you're the perp setting that off. And he says, that's typical clandestine CIA or special forces or guerrilla warfare. Always give yourself a 2-minute buffer. So the second set of charges was set. And by the way, there were 23 devices in that building. That's not even up for debate anymore. Like I said, all of these people coming forward in the search and rescue and law enforcement telling us the same exact thing, yeah, that's good enough for us. They weren't able to come out with photos. It was illegal. They were forbid from taking photos, but they told us what they saw. And it was 9:12 a.m. that the second set of charges were to go off. You have the walking wounded, your law enforcement, your search and rescue in there, trying to get these people out, whether they be recovering the dead or the living. And then the rest of the building was supposed to come down on them. Luckily, that did not happen. Why? Because the mercury switches on all of those devices that were to go off at 9:12 were damaged in the initial blast. Only 3 devices went off out of the 23. The other 20 were absconded by the Air Force and the Army and taken to Tinker Air Force Base. It's the big material and logistics and maintenance hub for the Air Force, 12 miles southeast of downtown Oklahoma City. And I can go in later in the interview and tell you one of the devices, actually all of them, were flown to Kirtland Air Force Base on a jet at 2 o'clock the morning after the bombing and completely dismantled. They knew exactly who made the bombs, where the material came from, how much it cost, with the level of expertise that was used in putting these devices together. And this is a professional job. This was a professional hit. It was not done by McVeigh. It was not done by Terry Nichols. Those guys, all they could do is, you tell them how to polish a rock or tie their shoes or shine their boots or their brass on their army metal, their uniforms. They can do that. They do not know how to put demolition devices together that were in that building. And even we've had retired FBI agents say that. So there's no way. Every single device that was in that building was military grade, stuff that you would find at Fort Detrick in Maryland and the Aberdeen Proving Grounds in Maryland. That's where they do the black box, and they call it skunk works and the black box work, stuff that's top secret that you never even hear about. That's the level of expertise that was on those devices. And I do know from a former public information officer at Kirtland, he says, yeah, when those things were flown into Kirtland, the guys taking them apart were just blown away. Excuse the phrase, but they said, my God, they've never seen a level of expertise like that. So this wasn't ANFO pulled up in a truck bomb in front of the Murrah building at all. That's just a ruse. That's the front story that made absolutely no sense.
Well, yeah. Well, usually the first, sometimes the first accounts can be people who missee things, but a lot of times the first accounts, the first reporters on the scene, that videotape ends up disappearing. You don't see a lot of videotape from 9/11 or Oklahoma City bombing. when people, the videotapes of people there who actually say, "Hey, I heard more than one explosion. Hey, I saw this, I heard that." It's you don't see people talk about that. And get into Terry Nichols, because I'm familiar because obviously I watched the documentary, but for the common person who doesn't know who Terry Nichols is and the history of Timothy McVeigh and what made what they sold us the motivation was Waco, and which he was at the Waco siege, and get into what the official story was, and then what you think happened, and the differences between the official story and what your movie ends up exposing.
Okay, I'll try to be as concise as I can with this because we could go on for days. I'm just, it's right now when I do these interviews, it's amazing, Ricky. You have total recall. You have visions of the interviews, and then where you got your information from, who came up to me at a certain day or time or year or whatever. So I don't want to go into the small minute details on that. All right, first of all, the official story, of course, Tim McVeigh, disgruntled GI, former GI from the Army, drove a Ryder truck full of ammonium nitrate fuel oil up to the front of the Murrah building, and by himself. This is something out of the Wile E. Coyote tiptoeing into the building with an Acme bomb. It's really that ludicrous. He lights a fuse, fills up the cab of the truck with smoke, gets out, and miraculously the fuse burns through a hole that he had from the masthead between the cab and the box. And it was an 18-foot trailer, by the way, with a 6-foot cab, 24-foot long truck. I stood up next to a truck identical to the one that was used there, allegedly, that was off the same assembly line the same day. And it so happened to be at a Ford dealership here in Oklahoma City. So I got a firsthand perspective of what we were dealing with. And so, he gets out, the cab's full of smoke, gets out, he runs away, hops into his marquee and drives away. Meanwhile, this truck bomb blows up and dismantles literally takes a third of the building out, killing 169 people, 5 who died within days after the bombing, and a couple of pedestrians that were completely killed. But what we found out, that the damage pattern, there were columns within 12 feet of the truck bomb that their drywall wasn't even singed. I mean, they had the furring strips in the drywall in perfect conditions. Pictures were still hanging on the wall, on the drywall, on those columns. Yet you have columns that are 47 to 52 feet away, that 6-foot sections are completely gone. They literally turn into finer than chalk dust, and they just blow away into thin air. That in and of itself shows that there were contact charges on the columns in those buildings. And we took blueprints that were given to us by Southwestern Bell Telephone and by the GSA office out of Fort Worth through confidential sources. And we traced back the columns, F-28 and F-23, and we actually developed that in a little bit in the movie. And we said, that there were contact charges, 47 to 52 feet away from that truck bomb. In fact, the planter that was 8 feet away from the truck wasn't even damaged. The bushes and the dirt and the shrubs weren't even damaged. How did we know? Because the debris that fell on those planters literally preserved what was in the planters. And when the debris was hauled away, within about 30 days after the bombing, actually it was, they started hauling it away, and then they leveled the building on May 23rd. What I'm getting at is we reverse engineered this whole event. We went back and says, okay, what happened, within 5 seconds, within 5 minutes, within 5 hours? And then you go back and you can reconstruct the crime scene. So those planters 8 feet away from the truck were not even, the concrete wasn't even destroyed. The plants are still in there. The dirt was still in there. That makes absolutely no sense if you're going to have the truck bomb as a sole source of the damage for the building. And then we went back to the damage 47 to 52 feet away. Lack of symmetrical blast pattern. So you're getting back to McVeigh and Nichols. McVeigh was actually working for the CIA, and we document that in the movie. And that information completely blew us away. We got that from Defense Council documents that were actually in an archive in Austin. An unbelievable treasure trove of information there. He was working for the CIA as a assassin and running drugs for the CIA. For those of your listeners that aren't familiar with it, I mean, this is common knowledge for a lot of us that have researched this. The CIA doesn't work from funding on Congress. They do to a limited extent, but their black operations, no way in hell that Congress is going to go ahead and fund that. So what do? They have other ancillary businesses running, drug smuggling, human trafficking. I mean, it's not even up for debate anymore. For the first year and a half, we had to go ahead and find out, okay, who are we dealing with here? And once we understood how they operated, said, okay, we're not going to try to stop these guys. That they're doing what they're doing, and because that's the way they work. But at least we understood, okay, how's the CIA run? What's going on? Where do they get their money from? McVeigh was part of that machine for 2.5 years after he got out of the U.S. Army. Okay, he had an honorable discharge. They said he went into Ranger School in Fort Benning in Georgia, washed out after 2 days. That's cock and bull. He was brought there specifically basically to be sheeped for the CIA, to get a new ID and to have a brand new occupation. He was on General Schwarzkopf's security detail in the first Persian Gulf War as a gunner, a tank gunner. 50 cal guns. He could take out a target 1,300 to 1,500 yards downrange. He literally could take somebody's head off. And he was very good at what he did. How do you get on the security detail for the supreme commander of the Allied forces in the Persian Gulf War if you don't have your act together? And to add insult to injury, the Army begrudgingly had to award him 2 of the medals that he won. It was given in the Persian Gulf War when he was in custody at the federal courthouse in Denver awaiting trial. They had no choice but to give it to him. That's crazy. And, yeah. This whole thing, like Alex Jones says, you can't make this stuff up. And even his defense counsel says, yeah, the sergeant from whatever post was out there near Denver had to give it to him. They couldn't hold back his awards. So that clearly shows that McVeigh had a history. Not only was he good at what he did, but he was commended for his expertise. Okay, so how does he get from that to allegedly blowing up the Murrah building? We found out, and this is another tidbit we couldn't get into the movie because, let me back up here a second, Ricky. We had so much information for the first-time viewer, for somebody that wasn't aware of the intricacies and what had happened and all of the backstory that we came across. There's no way in heck we would have been able to feed this information to them, literally coming out of a fire hose. So we had to pull in the reins on this 12-team horse, so to speak. It's like, wow, this thing could get out of control real quick, go on all different tangents. We literally had to strip it down to the bare basics of, okay, official story, this is what happened, and then we delved in just a little bit into the CIA and other things that would at least be more palatable to people. Otherwise, they thought we were probably smoking crack and just making this stuff up. We did not want to go down that alley. That is something that we really had to fight hard to really stay focused, and I think we did a pretty good job. Was that a conscious decision? Because there's the thing I think these documentaries, that what turned some people off is that a lot of people will just assume it's a conspiracy theory documentary, and right, exactly. And history is full of conspiracy. It's you look at every historical event. There's somebody with some backdoor deals. Isn't every historical event a conspiracy? Even if the official story was true, Timothy McVeigh conspired to blow up the building. And so, either it's a conspiracy and either it was just Timothy McVeigh who was an angry person who wanted to get back at the government, or there was another conspiracy. But at the end of the day, conspiracies happen. It sucks that they end up just polluting that word and just tainting the word. It's used in a pejorative sense. You're right, Ricky. I know exactly where you're coming from. But let me get back on point here. Okay, so McVeigh was actually his handler. We found out, and even in the state trial of Terry Nichols, when he was brought up on state charges, people don't understand that the federal trials were only for the 8 federal employees that were in that building, and that's what they were remanded and brought into Denver for. Of course, McVeigh was on trial first, and then followed by Terry Nichols. So the state trial was convened to charge Terry Nichols with 161 counts of manslaughter and conspiracy to commit murder. And that was actually convened in March of 2004, and June of 2004 he was sent back to the Supermax. Well, he wasn't sentenced to death in Oklahoma, even though a lot of former governors and the Oklahoma County district attorney wanted him to, but the jury says no. There's not enough preponderance of evidence to have a unanimous vote by the jury to convict him of and sentence him to death. So they sent him back to the Supermax in Florence. Took a jet back within a week from our county jail where he was remanded. Anyway, so getting back to McVeigh. All right, we know he was a professional assassin and a drug smuggler. Not even up for debate anymore. He used to write letters to his sister and his mom about that. And then they were trying to, the ironic thing is that the mother and the sister were trying to tell the FBI, look, my brother was set up here. You know, he didn't have any reason to blow up the building. We found out that number 2 at the time, Larry Potts under Louis Freeh with the FBI, was McVeigh's handler. No question about it. The defense counsel had that ironclad information. None of that came out in the trial for McVeigh because it was a catch-22. Stephen Jones, his job as McVeigh's defense counsel was to make sure McVeigh didn't get the death sentence and to minimize his sentence as best as he could. There's no way he could have done that by bringing in other people in the conspiracy because it would have actually made McVeigh complicit in the crime. But the ironic thing is that there was enough evidence to show that the FBI knew darn well what was going on, certain higher officials in the FBI. I'm not talking about local field office employees or the secretaries or the janitors, anything like that. We're talking the top echelon of the FBI in Washington knew that this was going to come down, as well as the ATF. But it was a catastrophic breakdown of communication. Ego wars, turf wars, and people vying for billions of dollars in funding. They did not want to share their intel. They wanted to be the knight in shining armor to prevent this, and it literally came back and blew up in their face. So they spent more money covering up this case than actually investigating it correctly. But getting back to Larry Potts, we found out from confidential sources that building was supposed to be blown up the night before at 9 p.m. on April 18th instead of 9 a.m. on April 19th. Larry Potts told McVeigh that he wanted a body count. McVeigh hit the roof. He pretty much said in no uncertain terms, look, I'm an assassin and I'm a drug smuggler, but I do not kill children. I am not a butcher. And he was very upset that he was asked to go live with this thing on 9 o'clock. But it was the bomb was supposed to be inert. It was not supposed to go off. What McVeigh did not know about was the interior ordnance. It's like, okay, as a film crew, it's like, well, where the hell did this stuff come from? Who put this in there? We found out that there were at least 4 other groups. It was concentric circles, basically overlapping each other, that had a vested interest in making sure that building went down. When an event like this comes up, you have the opportunity to at least stage a fake event. There are more people lining up in a queue to make sure this goes live. You had the Medellin drug cartel, huge drug case that was going to be going to court on May 10th of that year. That never came out in the media. You had the Whitewater Papers documents from the Clinton nefarious dealings with their money laundering in Arkansas years before. That was due to go in a congressional hearing May 15th of that year. Bill Clinton and Hillary Clinton would have been thrown in prison. Bill Clinton would not have been reelected. Can you imagine? I mean, the political ramifications of that hearing alone would have completely decimated any chance that Bill Clinton of getting reelected or his wife ever having a chance at any political career.
And he was a part of smuggling drugs too in Meta, Arkansas.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. As a governor and attorney general, he knew darn well what was going on. And the federal government was doing it under his nose, under his watch as a governor and attorney general in Arkansas. And I've talked to retired Arkansas State Highway Patrol. I said, yeah, we were paid very well to make sure that those drugs came through. So, I mean, that again, that's not even up for debate, but that's another story for another time. So you have all of these, you have this drug case ready to go, you have the Whitewater documents, and I said, well, why in the world would the Whitewater documents be stored in Oklahoma City? We found out from a source in Little Rock that there's this arcane rule for congressional hearings that, okay, when you are ready to indict or have a hearing to possibly indict a sitting president, you cannot have the documents used for that hearing stored in their home state. It would have been illegal because they were concerned about, the sanctity and the integrity of the documents, whether they'd still be preserved. So by geographic default, the closest federal building to Little Rock at the time was Oklahoma City. New Orleans was too far away. Dallas was too far away. St. Louis was too far away, so just by geographic default, those documents were stored on the 7th floor. We have a pretty good idea what room they were stored in. We never got our hands on any of them. The FBI absconded with all of those. In fact, those documents were so important. The CIA had documents in that building, as well as his Whitewater documents. The FBI was stepping over. We have this from Canine Search and Rescue in Oklahoma City Police, and it's in the movie. One of the officers that we interviewed, they were stepping over people that were still alive trying to reach out from the rubble to get rescued. And the FBI called off all search and rescue for several hours to make sure that those documents are taken out of the building before those people that were still alive, holding on to their life, were pulled out of the rubble.
That's
Crazy. That's sick.
Yeah.
That it doesn't get any worse than that.
And I think that's the part that people have a hard time consuming. I think I said this quote on a couple podcasts, but it's easier to trick people than to convince them they've been tricked, and it's so hard to convince people that what they have accepted as reality or the way they look at things isn't quite the way it seems, and I think it's hard not to retract and want to think, your first reaction will be, no, that can't be. Because we want to assume that there's good in people and nobody would put money over morals. But we see it in all types of situations when it comes down to corporations putting out drugs that they know are unhealthy and then, just making some quick profits and then, a bunch of, BP oil spill. I mean, there's tons of things where,
Sure.
I think it's hard, but that's why I think the other movie is so important too, because it gets to the history of it, the state of mind. Where if you watch A Noble Lie, and actually the title A Noble Lie actually almost makes sense for the other movie also, because you got that was from
Plato.
Plato, yeah, and which meant I'm gonna fuck it up, so you might as well say it, Chris. But
Go ahead.
The Noble Lie, it came from some of his writings, right? And
That's correct. And it just said that those in charge of society will continue to perpetuate the noble lie to have control over the critical thinkers as well as those that don't really give a rip anymore. And this goes all the way back to the Greek times. It's a timeless a statement and a timeless observation.
Yeah.
He was very astute. Plato knew exactly what was going on. Plato was probably, aside from his amazing literary work, he was the Greek counterpart to Ron Paul back then. Very awake, knew what was going on, and he knew what the ruling class was doing. So yeah, the state of mind, basically, we didn't go as far back in the Greek times. We touched upon that, but we tried to stay within the last 200 to 300 years to show how, okay, this is how things have evolved over time. But Oklahoma City isn't the end-all be-all. It's just one of many events,
exactly,
as you touched upon. And we were just, locally, we were very blessed, like I said, to have the opportunity.
You guys are from Oklahoma, right?
Well, there were several people on the crew. I'm actually from around the U.S. I moved here in January of 2003 to actually work on the film. Logistically, it was impossible for me to keep traveling from Fort Worth, even though that's, a 3-hour drive away. Took a 1-year hiatus in New Mexico, lived in the mountains up there for a while, and, was able to relax and remodel the cabin and really put my thoughts together on the movie. And then I moved here in January of 2003. And within the first 2 weeks, I tell you what, Ricky, I don't know how people found out, but I'm not a religious guy. I believe I have a Christian background, and I respect anybody, whatever, if they're Buddhist faith, Muslim, Islam, whatever. I mean, all the power to you. That's great. There is a higher power above us that guides us if we're trying to do the right thing, and whatever deity you believe in. But within the first 2 weeks I got here, and I'm going to share this. A lot of people aren't aware of this. I'm going to a Walmart. I had to have a job at a local hotel just to pay the bills. Obviously, we weren't making any money on the film, so you have to fund your work.
Absolutely.
You work your day job to fund your passion, as they say, whatever it be. And my passion is the film.
But I do the same thing.
Yeah, you understand that, and it's 99% of us do. So it's after my shift. I'm done with my shift at 11 o'clock. Going shopping to get some food at Walmart. It's about 12:30 after I get out. It's cold. I mean, this is the middle of January by that time, and an off-duty cop comes up to me. He's doing door, security. Still had his Oklahoma City uniform on, a police uniform badge, and he follows me out. And I'm thinking, why is a cop following me out here? So I get in the car, start it up, warm it up, and he taps on the window with the back of his flashlight, and he motions to me to roll the window down. And I says, can I help you with something? And he says, no, everything's all right. He says, you're Chris Emery, aren't you? And I looked at him and I was like, how'd you know? And he says, look, we got our ways. You're on the internet working on this film. He reached out his hand and he shook my hand and he says, thank you for doing what you're doing. And I was just dumbfounded. I thought, wow, this is a complete stranger, an off-duty cop coming to me, thanking me for working on the film. And I had only been in town for 2 months. A year and a half later, and I'll wrap this up real quick. A year and a half later, I'm filling up my car at a 7-Eleven, and it's pouring rain outside. And I thought, okay, I'm just trying to get the car filled and so forth. This guy pulls up next to me on the other side of the gas pumps. And we're under the underhang, so we're keeping dry. But anyway, he pulls up. There's no doors on his car. It's this Cutlass 88, whatever, 2-door. And he gets out and he's filling up his gas and does the same thing as me. And he comes over and high-fives me and he says, thanks for working on the movie. I have no idea who this guy is. So we walk in, pay for the gas, and he's over at the beer cooler, and he motions over to me and he says, come here, I got something to tell you. And he says, look, I know about your work for the year and a half since you got here in January of 2003. And he says, who are you? And he's undercover for OSBI, Vice. He's basically trying to figure out, helping his bosses figure out what the heck's going on with drug smuggling through the state of Oklahoma. We got I-35 through this state, Ricky. It's a huge pipeline for drugs, still is. Whether people want to admit it or not. So at the time, they were working on a big bust. And he says, I really appreciate what you guys are doing. He says, I can't come out and, say anything about the bombing, but he was a rookie at the time, first year with the State Highway Patrol. And he says, I knew what happened. He says, a lot more people involved. And it was I was stunned. I says, well, what's going on? He says, look, we got your back. He says, you have no idea how many of us in law enforcement, and he just rattled off OCPD and different agencies, we got your back because there are people in this town all the way up to the governor's office. And mind you, Oklahoma City is the state capital. He said the governor's office does not want this movie to come out, nor does the district attorney's office. But he says there are people that basically want to see harm come your way, and he says we're not going to have that happen. And he high-fived me, gave me a big bear hug, and he walked out, paid for his beer and walked out. And I just stood there stunned. I almost started crying because it was overwhelming. I had no idea that we had all of these people backing us up. It was amazing. Yeah, and that is the support that we had to make sure this movie came out.
Yeah, that's awesome. And it's cool that you have that story. You're working your full-time job to do your passion. I mean, I do the same thing here. I have a full-time job, and then I do music and this podcast on the side, and I definitely don't do it for any financial gain because there really isn't any.
Oh, yeah.
And you do it because you're fulfilling something, and you're trying to live a life with meaning, or if not, then you're living a life meaningless. So I try to do my part, and that's why I love having filmmakers on my show, because there's so many documentaries that I think are so important that and like you were saying, like reality is stranger than fiction, and people watch fictional movies and all to it. If you want to watch a fictional movie, that's awesome, but if you want to watch the best conspiracy movie or thriller suspense movie, watch a documentary. There's so many, the most corruption, it happens in real life, and you can watch documentaries that will blow your mind. And
there's a lot of great ones out there.
Yeah, and I've been lucky enough to have a lot of them on, and I think it's just so important because little by little, I think people are becoming more aware of our surroundings. I think that with the internet access and our access to information, we just can easily Google things. We can kind of look things up, and I think it's going to be a little harder to kind of brainwash people a little bit, just because you look at the Syrian conflict, trying to get into Syria. I think the public did an awesome job of saying no, and I think that was kind of a win for the public. I mean, they've tried to get into Iran for multiple times. Iran, and you look at the Russia thing. I think there's enough good information out there where if people look for answers, they can kind of get both sides of the story and make their own conclusion. And I think that little by little, the government's going to realize that it's harder to convince people to get into an unjustified war than it ever has been, and it will only keep getting harder as long as we keep. Well, first of all, we have to make sure net neutrality stays the same too. So, but. That's the beautiful thing about the internet. But to get back to the movie, there's a couple points I wanted to get to. The history of Timothy McVeigh's doctor, right? What was his name? Lewis West, Dr. Lewis West?
Jolin West. He's from Oklahoma City. Yeah, Oklahoma City. His son lives here, and we had tried to reach out to his son to be interviewed for the movie, and we just logistically, it wasn't happening. He was living out of state or something at the time. But he was amazing. And his his boss, the one that Jolene West learned from, actually we develop on in the movie that actually did a lot of completely insane research up in Montreal, and that actually was coordinated with the CIA, and the CIA actually used a lot of his studies, which actually went to trickle on down to Guantanamo Bay. Dr. John Smith, who actually was a protege of Jolene West, was the head psychiatrist or psychologist at Guantanamo Bay. I was on hiatus in Australia. I came back in January of 2010, and I was asked to find out where John Smith, Dr. Smith, that's his real name, it wasn't made up, where he lived here in Oklahoma City, and I missed getting a hold of him by 3 months. He had passed away in April of 2011. I didn't discover where his office was until May of that year, and oddly enough, it's 2 miles from where I live here in Oklahoma City. So you have a consistent pattern of these people working together and doing it for nefarious reasons. But Jolene West, he was the Prince of Darkness. I mean, when this guy shows up at your jail or your town or your office building to interview somebody, watch out. I mean, he literally just he leaves. How do we say this? He's there for all the wrong reasons and none of the right reasons. So he knew. In fact, it was Al Gore that wanted him to talk to McVeigh, and he had the opportunity to talk to some of the victims' family members and survivors, and they said that this guy was sick. He just, the way he looked at life and how he interpreted the case, telling them to pretty much not support not to do anything but support the official narrative. One guy kicked him out of his house. It was the grandfather of one of the victims, told Jolene West to get the hell out of the house. He didn't want to talk to him anymore. After 5 minutes, and there's people have an innate sense of good judgment, intuition, and he said after 5 minutes of talking to Jolene West, he knew that this guy was evil from the core, and he didn't want him in his house.
So you think that he was hired to what was his role with Timothy McVeigh?
Oh, it was to keep McVeigh under basically keep his eye on the ball, keep focused on not telling about any of the other things that he did, especially in testimony in the trial, or bringing in other people who were involved in the case.
Now, 2020 actually did this is another thing that I think a lot of people don't realize, that this is so far from a conspiracy theory movie that 2020 actually did a special on about the prior knowledge of I believe the ATF and stuff like that, and I think they did a report, and then I think they were going to do a fuller or a longer version of the report, and then it never got aired, right? Something like that.
That's right. It was two part. Both parts were actually filmed. The first part aired, and then Dr. Roger Charles, former Marine, he actually worked for ABC, was a specialist on terrorist, events and so forth. And Roger's done some fantastic work. He helped. He funneled a lot of his research our way through other parties. But his boss was given a call by the Clinton White House, somebody higher up within the administration, and they were pretty much told to, quote unquote, shit can the second episode. Roger Charles resigned immediately in protest. He says, come on, guys, you're going to have the White House tell us what to do? We're an independent news organization. And it was right then and there that Roger Charles knew who was pulling the strings. That he was supposed to come out, and Clinton was, once again, concerned about his reelection coming up in November of 96. So he had from April of 95 to November of 96 to cover his butt. And that's exactly what he did, destroying the Whitewater Papers, quashing the objective reports, broadcasts of what happened. They didn't want anybody, the prosecution didn't want anybody else coming into this other than Tim McVeigh and Terry Nichols. In fact, they even dismissed the initial indictment was for others unknown. Well, by the time it was presented in front of the grand jury and left the grand jury in October of 95, there was nothing to refer to others unknown. They were only going to McVeigh and Nichols, which is completely ludicrous. These guys had very little to do with this case at all. In fact, Nichols, with the evidence, he only came 2 votes away from being completely acquitted of all charges on his federal trial. We found out that the 2 people on the grand jury that voted for his guilt and his complicity were actually plants on the grand jury.
Wow.
That's a whole other story in and of itself. I mean, it was just corrupt from the word go. And Judge Maish, who presided over both trials, quashed all of the testimony, 162 pages, called a writ of mandamus, that the defense counsel, Stephen Jones, and 58 of his assistants, paralegals, professional attorneys, everybody, they worked night and day to get this 162-page document, presented it to the judge in June of 1997. McVeigh's trial he started in later that month. Actually, I take that back. It was presented in February of 1997. McVeigh went to trial in June. In between February and June, the judge sealed those documents. He didn't want any of that to be presented in front of the jury. That would have completely blown away the prosecution's case. So you have a corrupt judge, you have two corrupt members of the jury. How else do you expect the trial to turn out but in the favor of the federal government and the Department of Justice? It was corrupt.
Yeah, that's crazy. And the other thing is, there's no tape of it. There's no tape of any of it. Like wasn't there their explanation the fact that they switched tapes from all the cameras at the same time?
Oh, you mean as far as the bombing?
Yeah, the bombing itself. Yeah,
right. That of course is patently false on its face. We have sources here. In fact, a very good friend of mine, oddly enough, that was interviewing for a job for security. The company he was with wanted to bid for the security bid, which is coming up April 1 for renewal. And he interviewed for this job to bid in March of that year, less than 30 days before the bombing. And he saw all of the security cameras and the monitors. There were 32 monitors in a special room near there's a tunnel between the parking ramp below where the Murrah building stood and to the federal courthouse across the street just to the south. And he saw all of those cameras. The monitors are working fine. The cameras are working fine. The tapes were running, VHS. They didn't have digital back then. It was still, the crossover to digital wasn't complete then. Plus, we have ADT Security, which said that they did maintenance on all of those cameras in that building 2 weeks before the bombing, and it was fine. It passed the inspection, which was required for insurance and for the fire marshal and everybody else. You have a series of inspections you have to go through to make sure that your occupancy permit is valid.
Yeah.
ADT says, there was nothing wrong with those cameras. Absolutely nothing wrong.
It seems like a reoccurring theme because they use the same bullshit with the Pentagon. How can something that has cameras on every corner of the building not have any video of what happened? And they do the same thing. Like, they convince us to believe a story without any evidence. I mean, you look at the Boston bombing. I'm not sure what happened with the Boston bombing, but I do know that I'd love to see some video of them actually, planting the backpacks and some evidence. I mean, to take the official story and just say, hey, I'm going to take their word for it, seems insane to me, because I feel like if you're lied to over and over again, which obviously, the most famous lie, in recent history is the Iraq War and our justification in going into there. Like, so if you're constantly getting lied to, why would you not second guess what they're telling you? Like, I feel like people still at times still say, hey, well, this is the story, like, we're going to go with this until we hear otherwise. The way I look at it is that they're past, like, they're innocent until proven guilty. They should be guilty until proven innocent. Like, when the government has lied to you about the official story so many times, like, we should assume they're lying until they show us otherwise, and show us the evidence. And is there any I can't remember if I saw this in a Noble Eye or was this somewhere I saw somewhere else, but was there any link to possibly John Doe 2, the guy that was with Timothy McVeigh, and him working at Logan Airport? Have you ever heard anything about that during September 11th?
One of them, yes. And he ended up, oddly enough, throwing bags at Logan. I don't know if he was there in the morning of 9/11, but he did throw bags at Logan at one time, and it was in close proximity time frame to 9/11. He ended up being homeless. He had a severe drinking problem when he was here in Oklahoma City, and he had gotten DUI tickets in Oklahoma City. We saw that through records at the OCPD office. But I don't know as far as his connection with the 9/11 hijackers. What we do know is that this individual was very remorseful in what he knew about Oklahoma City, but was pretty much told to keep his mouth shut. And he was, in fact, the Boston police had arrested him for vagrancy. He was a bum, literally out on the streets of Boston, and he tried to kill somebody, impaled him with a broken beer bottle. That came out about 3 years ago. So I'm thinking, okay, I knew where this guy lived and what trouble he got into in Oklahoma City, and here he is almost killing somebody as a bum in the streets of Boston.
Wow.
So, I mean, it's just a very twisted backstory to him. But we just never had enough documentation, and it would have actually confused the issue if we would have put it in the movie. So it's an interesting side story, but it wasn't relevant to our storyline at the time.
Yeah, yeah. And how did what was how did you guys get to his identity? How did you figure out who it was?
Oh, in fact, Brad Edwards with Channel 4, KFOR, identified him. And he had his haircut and his appearance was very similar to John Doe. Let me back up here a second, Ricky. Yep. What we found out, there's actually 12 to 18 people involved with this case. 6 of those were actually working for the government, including McVeigh. But the others, besides McVeigh, didn't know what they were participating in. It was very compartmentalized. They only did a certain part of what they did. They didn't know the whole scope of the whole mission. That is textbook CIA. From day one, when you're working for the CIA, that's exactly what you're taught. Because it's called plausible deniability. If you are caught, if you are brought up, indicted for as a co-conspirator, you literally don't know the whole story, and that's done on purpose. So, out of these 12 to 18 people, 6 were working for the government. Some knew what was going on. Most of them didn't. And it's a much wider scope. This guy that Brad Edwards identified, we know that he was actually an informant for the FBI at the time. So, other than that, we weren't able to trace him down. He already left town. His address was invalid. His phone number was disconnected, so we couldn't follow that rabbit trail.
Yeah.
But anyway, getting back to Nichols, did you want to go back? And he was basically an Army buddy of McVeigh. They both served at Fort Riley, the post up there in Kansas. McVeigh had a mental and emotional stranglehold on Nichols, because he says if Nichols didn't follow through with his operation, McVeigh would have killed his family. And we had no doubt that he would have. I mean, my God, the guy's a professional assassin with the CIA. Nichols knew that. Why would he have any reason to doubt that claim? So Nichols was coerced into following through, kept his mouth shut, didn't tell authorities what was coming down. But there's a double-edged sword on this thing, Ricky, and like what I was going to get back to earlier, if we have a second here.
Yeah.
The nephew of the former governor of Utah, the last name is Bangerter. In fact, when we were in Salt Lake City doing our screening of our movie in March of 2012, the first commercial theater that we were able to show the movie in, great crew up there. Our hosts were just absolutely phenomenal. We're driving around Salt Lake City and we see Bangerter Expressway. And I'm looking at my co-host in the back seat, Holland, and he says, that's Johnny's uncle. This expressway is named after the former governor. He goes, yep. It was Johnny Bangerter, the nephew, that was approached by McVeigh in February of 1995 to blow up a building using a Ryder truck in Denver. Well, this guy knew that something was taken to high heaven. I mean, who would set themselves up to fail like that? But McVeigh approached him under the alias of Tim Tuttle, which we found out through defense documents was one of the several aliases. McVeigh had 7 or 8 different aliases he was using. I mean, he had driver's license from 7 different states. How do you do that unless you're working for the government or the CIA? You don't get 7 different licenses. That's impossible. So anyway, one of the aliases was Tim Tuttle, and that's what McVeigh was approaching this Johnny Bangerter under. And Bangerter found out that there was a short list. It coincided with what our findings were. Seattle, Fort Worth, Denver, Oklahoma City, and I believe it was Atlanta. U.S. Marshal's office knew of this short list. But McVeigh was working jointly for the FBI and the ATF at the time to try to get this Johnny to, he was trying to set him up as a dupe to take the fall. And Johnny didn't want anything to do with it. So after the bombing, it's like, holy crap, I knew this guy. He asked me to do this except in Denver in February of 1995. So we know this whole thing was staged. Unfortunately, it was the other groups dealing with the drug cartels and with the Whitewater investigation that got in and really set the live charges on that. To this day, we have no reason to believe that McVeigh knew those charges were in the building, nor did he set them there. And of course, we know that he didn't have the expertise to actually put them together or set them up. That wasn't his line of expertise.
Yeah. That's there's that movie. Anybody who goes out and buy it, they purchase it. You're gonna have to watch it multiple times because it's a lot of information. But the good thing is that I think we talked about it before we started recording. It's not speculation. It's not it's theories. It's a lot of good information, and you can connect the dots yourself and really see that at least there's multiple holes in the story of what we've been told, and there's a lot of dots that you can easily connect. So that's a really important film. And again, like I said, I think for probably the generation just a tad older than me, that's probably their September 11th. That was their the big event that they remember, where I'm sure everybody remembers where they were, and even me at a young age, I remember where I was when I heard about it. So I think it's an important event, and obviously after September 11th, I think people don't talk about the Oklahoma City bombing as much. But I think that if you do your research on Oklahoma City bombing, I think it probably makes it easier for you to consume the idea that they might have done something similar on September 11th. So I think that's really important. And now let's get to your other film, the more recent State of Mind, The Psychology of Control. That movie is amazing, and it's one of my favorite documentaries. And the reason it is because it goes right back into history, all to the people like Machiavelli, H.G. Wells, Huxley family, the Edward Bernays, which we talk a lot about the show, and all these people and their influences on on the way we think, on basically the techniques they use to kind of keep us dumb, to dumb us down, and basically brainwashing. And I know we use that term quite often on the show, but the thing about brainwashing is that they go right into the actual techniques and the people who came up with these techniques and how they've been used for hundreds and thousands of years. It's not a new technique. It's not something that just our government today is used, but it goes back to Nazi Germany. It goes back to it goes even further, and it just you look at the empires and the ruling class is always going to try to find a way to stay the ruling class, and
Sure.
And so how did you come up with the idea for this film, and how did you get this amazing cast and just all these great minds together, and what was basically the motivation to put out this film?
It was, once again, as we mentioned earlier, Ricky, the feedback we got from the first film. People were asking us why wasn't there more critical thinking, and more people asking questions. So once again, we went back to the root cause, cognitive dissonance, how people are controlled, whether it be subtle, overt or covert. And then Richard Grove, of course, who's actually a very good friend of our crew. He's just dynamite, both personally and professionally. He's very upstanding. We're trying to come together with, how are we going to title this thing? And if we had a wish list, and that's basically when we do interview documentaries, you put together a wish list. Who would we bring together to try to get, on the psychological aspect, how we're controlled? So we went down the list, and we were able to get out of I think we had 35 or 40 people. We were able to get the 15 or 20 logistically. They were available. They were very interested in our work. They saw our first film. And so that's how it all came together. And then we had to figure out, how are we going to present this information? You don't want to overwhelm the viewer. And we go for what we call the uninitiated, the first-time viewer. How are you going to give them a palatable orientation to something that they can understand, and then help spread to other people that are of the same mind, that really have no idea about this? So it was a gradual process. There was a change. Some of the people that worked with us on our first film decided to make a change. They went out and did their own thing as radio show hosts and writers, very good at what they do. And so we had to make some changes there. We brought Richard in not only as a co-writer, but as one of the interviewees, and that was probably one of the smartest moves we made. The guy's brilliant. And so that's how the movie came together. And then once again, we had a lot of good footage. You have to stay within your storyline, stick to the outline, the narration. And I see it, the narration, the storyline, because I have to register it with the Writers Guild, America West Writers Guild, as well as the Library of Congress. And it's ingenious to see how Richard and the other writers put this together. My forte, a lot of people say, well, didn't you help write it? No, I literally didn't. I wasn't the expert on the State of Mind, Psychology of Control. My forte in that movie was logistics, getting the crew from point A to point B, several interviews they had to do throughout the U.S., and then helping with the marketing, liaison with the film festivals, and then, of course, with our agent. We got a contract with a film agent in L.A. and a distributor. That's where my assets lie. And then everybody came together with their different skill sets. So we were giddy. When this thing came out, the production quality took quantum leaps above the second film, as you can see. Yeah. And so we were very blessed. And Alex Jones, huge. And I have no qualms about saying that. I mean, if it wasn't for him and his exclusive contract with us, his worldwide audience, that's what really catapulted us. We just flew into the stratosphere after that. And then that's what helped us get recognized by our film agent in LA. So hopefully that answered your question. And the whole idea was just these emails, consistent questions of why people didn't ask, why wasn't there any critical thinking on the first film?
Yeah, critical thinking is it's something we talk a lot about, and it just we we all have the capability at a young age to imagine and use creativity. When we draw, we paint, we play. There's a lot of we use a part of our brain, and that as we get older, we turn off more and more. As we get older, they just teach us information. They tell us to memorize information, names and dates, and that's it. And we turn off that part of our brain that really imagines and like you said, the critical thinking, the and imagination. And this movie gets right to the bottom of how it wasn't by accident, and I mean, I know you talk a little bit about the Rockefellers and their hand in it, and do you want to get in that a little bit? How some of those families have influenced like the way our education is works today?
Oh yes, absolutely. And in fact, Charlotte Iserbyt, one of the interviewees, she's just absolutely brilliant. Worked for the U.S. Department of Education, wrote white papers and position papers for the president, for Ronald Reagan. Would report to him, on a periodic basis. I don't know if it was weekly or biweekly. And she knew how the Rockefellers, way back in the late 1800s, early 1900s, these people were amassed so much wealth through Standard Oil and a lot of their holdings, and along with the Carnegies, that they said, look, if we want to continue to live the lifestyle that we have and make the money we have to continue to take advantage of the regular guy, the common Joe that goes to work every day. How are we going to do that? Well, it's great for the existing generation that they were dealing with, the coal mine workers or the oil workers out in the fields. But they wanted to make sure that their dynasty was perpetuated for many generations to follow. So they had to come up with they borrowed on Machiavelli and what worked in the monarchies in Europe and so forth, in the oligarchy. And then they said, okay, how can we incorporate that in the society here in the U.S.? So when we're gone, our kids could continue to amass the wealth and live the lifestyle that we have. And their arrogance knows no bounds. They thought that they were untouchable. And in some cases they were, but it came back to backfire on them with the inbreeding and so forth. Especially the English monarchy. So the Rockefellers basically took what worked for the monarchy and continued to use that, and then they set aside what didn't work for them. So Iserbyt comes into the picture, and she's saying, okay, the education system, from the day that you go to kindergarten, how is your thought process shaped? It's shaped to be submissive. It's shaped not to be a critical thinker. It's shaped to take the orders of the teacher, of the state, or whatever the case may be. And in some cases, it was with religion, but we didn't have the time. I mean, that's a whole other movie in itself, dealing with the religion aspect of all of this. So once again, we had to stay on point. And Iserbyt, and I remember having a conversation with her after the film release. She saw the copy, the entire DVD, and she loved it. But I tell you what, that was an animated conversation for 45 minutes. And what I'm getting at here, Ricky, is that the education system in the 1940s, communist China, the U.S. Department of Education wanted to have something that was almost identical to what the communist Chinese implemented in the 1940s and 50s, to teach our children. Here we are, 3 or 4 generations later, to be submissive, to work for the state, to think that the state is the number one thing, and not to be the critical thinker. Because there's no way in heck that the ruling oligarchy would have stayed in power if they had a lot of these critical thinkers coming out in droves out of kindergarten. They didn't want that. So that was a major aspect. And of course, you have your advertising, which is working closely with a lot of the government agencies. And so there's a consistent pattern of, okay, if we want to maintain control, how are we going to do it in the simplest way and be covert about it? And that's what we try to cover in the movie.
Yeah, and there's Adam Curtis has touched on some of these these topics. You have Noam Chomsky, who did the film Manufacturing Consent, and
sure.
There's this isn't a conspiracy theory. This is people. It only makes sense. You want to dumb down the population, and what is intelligence? I know I never really did great in school, and I never went to college, and I know plenty of people who did and have way better grades than me. And in their field, they are very intelligent. They're very smart when it comes down to their field. They're very good at memorizing their information needed for their field. But outside of that, it's amazing when you get out of their familiar zone or what they're comfortable with. They're like you said, they're just, there's no critical thinking. There's no they can't their intelligence, they just can't mold ideas together. It's like, oh, they're very good at regurgitating information they were taught, but it's that part of your brain that helps you kind of break the mold and look at things outside the box that they don't want us to do. They want us to be very good at just memorizing names and dates and stuff like that. And from Edward Bernays and his, what he did in marketing and try to tap into our passions and desires and stuff like that, to the Huxley family. And you guys talk about eugenics a lot in the film. For the basic listener who might not be familiar with what that is, you mind expanding on that a little bit?
Oh my gosh, it's probably one of the most horrific things that ever, and Hitler tried to do it, of course, with the eugenics. In short, is culling out members of society, whether they'd be the undesirables, whether it be the sick, the infirmed, folks that have different sexual preferences, whatever the case may be, and that is the root of evil there. I mean, these people think that they're God. One of the ruling class families in England thought that they were supreme, and they were doing a lot of inbreeding within their family, and it ended up backfiring on them because there's a lot of mental problems they had with some of their higher ups in their particular clan. But the eugenics, Margaret Sanger with Planned Parenthood, to have the audacity to think that she could eventually do away with the African American members of our society. I mean, that is completely off the charts. That's thinking as a spawn of Satan. You simply, I couldn't even comprehend even doing anything like that. But she thought that was normal, that she could get away with it.
She said something like that?
Oh, absolutely. She thought that the African American members of our society should be done away with through what is it, infertility and so forth, and sterilization. My God, and that she was the founder of Planned Parenthood. Eugenics, like I said, getting back to the definition, is basically doing away with the undesirables in your society. The Germans did it with the mentally and physically disabled, killing them. It's like, come on, really? It's something that we try to present and tell people, look, this is going on to this day. This is going to be the downfall of our modern society if we don't step up and say, hey, you know what? Not only is this wrong, but we're going to take measures to make sure this doesn't continue again. And getting back to the purpose of the movie is not only do we present the who, the why, the what, and the where, but we try to offer solutions in the last 12 to 15 minutes, commentaries from our experts. This is, okay, we realize this stuff is going on, but what can we do to at least abate it or stop it on a personal level or a local level? And that gets back to a lot of other people that I've talked to, whether it be about 9/11 or other issues, contamination of our water and whatever. We have to go back to the local level, on the state or the county, the local and the county and the state level, because the federal government doesn't give a rat's rear end about us for whatever entity that is out there. So if we take control of what we're doing and be aware of what we're up against, and it's not as overwhelming as a lot of people will make it out to be, but take responsibility for what we're doing and be critical thinkers and respect others that are critical thinkers. That's one direction to our solution and how we can actually make this a better country and a better world.
Yeah. Who do you think had the biggest influence on society and the brainwashing idea? Who do you think was their philosophy or their writings or whoever was the biggest influence, or whose work do people do you think they use the most, or techniques, I should say, to try to brainwash people? Who do you think had the biggest impact? I know Edward Bernays is one that gets brought up a lot.
Sure,
is that
but
one?
You go back to Machiavelli, and it's just a modern reincarnation of what he did. And I really didn't understand much about Machiavelli. Once again, remember, I didn't help write the movie, but I learned a lot strictly on a lot of this information, the body of information. Machiavelli was probably one of the most sinister psychologists, for lack of a better term, and manipulators of society that there ever was, because it was the ruling elite. The kings and queens came to him for advice.
He
That
was
tells you how sick he was.
he was
And
basically
he,
a political, like our time, their version of a political consultant, right? Basically, somebody who wanted to help the ruling
sure.
class. I think he helped with like psychological welfare techniques, right? He was
Mhm.
helping basically
Right.
convince them, hey, I know the techniques to keep you in power and keep everybody else servants, right?
Right. And luckily, there was, of course, and even what we found out in the first movie, Ricky, is that there's the yin and the yang, the good and the bad. Luckily, there were people that understood who Machiavelli was, and they were able to counter his writings. And they exposed what he was writing and offered solutions to that. They were back then, our counterparts as filmmakers. But of course, they were working in film. They were more in the literary aspect of that. So Machiavelli, I think, he was a seminal writer at the time, and that's who the Rockefellers and the Carnegies and a lot of these ruling elite to this day still follow a lot of his principles. And I think that's why we try to develop on that, in the movie, to say, look, this is the basis of why things are happening, why they are. And then, of course, the advertising and um, getting back to Planned Parenthood. Everybody's got a right to choice, but there's the sexual education of the younger generation the key to survival in a lot of these people, whether it be Margaret Sanger's Planned Parenthood or the ruling elite, is you have to have something in motion at all times to perpetuate your strength. Because if you don't, then your current generation is going to die and your legacy is going to fall away. So they always have to think 30, 40, 50 years into the future. And it's getting a lot more sinister and a lot more, how do we say this, overt or covert. And that's what we're trying to lay out in this film, is to say, okay, these are the principles. This is how these people do these things. Watch out, and make sure that you stay focused on what's good for your family versus what's bad.
Yeah,
But the ruling elite wants you to stay focused on what's bad.
yeah, and the last thing they want is people who are going to think for themselves, and that's why I think you see more and more people get dependent on the government, and
Right.
it's not by accident, a lot of times people think, and I hate talking about Republicans and Democrats because they're all in the same, but
Sure.
people look at the Democrats and they're like, oh, they give all the money to the poor, one helps the rich, one helps the poor, and then obviously the middle class gets fucked by both, but at the end of the day, like even the Democrats, their intentions aren't pure. I mean, they help the poor because they know that who's gonna vote for them, or who's not gonna vote for them when they're basically dependent on that party, and it's just a way of getting people dependent on keeping them in power, and keep giving I shouldn't say give our taxes. We don't give our taxes. They take our taxes, but. It's and bloodline's really important, and I mean there's so much in this film, and I can't recommend it enough for people to check it out, and it's called State of Mind: The Psychology of Control, and like I said, we talk a lot about brainwashing and stuff like that, but this movie really gets to the root of it, and the techniques and the people who created the techniques, and really breaks it down for you. And Richard Grove, who does a website Tragedy and Hope, he's a freaking genius. I mean, the guy, he's a historian, but he's just a wealth of knowledge, and it's amazing how much he knows, and just his way of breaking it all down, and he just, anything he touches is gold. I mean, if you ask me, just he does tons of great work, and yeah. So I mean, the history of it, and it reminds me kind of like that movie from the '70s, Network. Just about the tube,
Sure.
and how the tube's going to tell you how to sleep. I mean, how to dress, how to think, and all this stuff. And even that was an old movie that makes as much sense today, if not more sense today, than it did then. And just about how they brainwash in marketing. I mean, Edward Bernays. I mean, he gets brought up a lot because of the fact that he was such a big influence in marketing and how to control people, because you can't control people with force forever. I mean, a better way of controlling people is with information. Democracy works when we're getting all the right information. If we're not getting the right information, or you're controlling the information we're being given, then it's a lot easier to manipulate what we think, and it's a lot easier for us not to have a real good opinion on things when we're not getting all the information in the first place. So, that's a big part of it. And I think today we're just, we do have access to more information than ever, which is great, because, you really don't have to be brainwashed unless you want to be, or you don't know what's going on. And because, you can go online and do your own research, and you can go online and get real information, but we're not that much different than like China or North Korea. I know we like to think we are, but our media is controlled just as much, and we really aren't being fed all the information. and that's the thing about all these documentaries and alternative media. I just had James Corbett on, which I believe somebody from your film has done. You guys have done some interviews on his show too, and
Oh yeah.
just great places to get information and to figure out what's really going on in the world. So I can't recommend this movie enough. Anything else about this movie you wanna get into? Any really important information? Or I know you said you weren't involved with the writing as much. Was there any piece of the information or any information in this movie while you were a part of creating it and just being around these people you interviewed? Any information that you didn't know that kind of blew you away, that you were like, holy shit, like, wow, this is a learning process for me just being a part of this?
Well, Doug Valentine, all of the interviewees were just amazing. I mean, the wealth of information, but how do I say, my God, Anthony Schaefer comes in from the military aspect. I mean, he was military intelligence for years. You got John Rappaport. He's so qualified. I mean, he was a consultant with ABC News for several years, a brilliant writer. Eldon Taylor, psychologist from Medicine Lake outside of Spokane, Washington. We flew him down here to interview him for the film and went out to dinner with him, and he's just telling us about he's studying the Bernays aspect of the psychological control and everything that happens behind the scenes in advertising. And I found that especially interesting because I had worked in front of the camera as a professional actor and model, and with CBS for 4 years as a contractor. So I understood the advertising end of that. And it was great to be able to talk to him. In fact, we still text each other quite often. He's asking me to, read his latest book. Very good working relationship there. Who else? And of course, Charlotte Iserbyt. Her just unbelievable. Just laid, the Chinese communist influence right out there for everybody to see in the education system. So it's a combination of a lot. I really can't peg one, not only because it wouldn't be fair, but it wouldn't be accurate. I was just stunned to see a lot of the behind the scenes footage and stuff we couldn't include in the movie. And I'm not bragging on the movie because I made it. I'm bragging on it because it's a solid piece of work. You've got the experts coming to the table and helping us explain this whole concept. And we were just very blessed, number one, that they agreed to come on board, and number two, that we were actually able to get them on camera. It's one thing to wish to have somebody in your movie. It's a whole different thing to make sure that you get them from point A to point B, get that down on tape, and get it edited. That's where the real film work comes in. And like I said, to this day, I'm just giddy that we're able to do it all.
Yeah, and I think that after watching this film, I think it almost, even though they came out in reverse, if you watch State of Mind first and then you watch Noble Lie, I think it's a lot easier for you to consume things or look at the Oklahoma City bombing or 9/11 or any historical event like the JFK murder and with an open mind. And I think that when you realize that the tactics and these tactics have been used throughout history. The idea of false flag, if conspiracy theorists didn't come up with the term false flag. I mean, that was a tactic that's been around for a long time. And you basically just take advantage of people's emotions and get them to basically think emotionally instead of logically. So that's all really, really important. So Chris, before I let you go, where can they get these films? How can they?
Sure.
If you have any upcoming work, how do they get a hold of you? How do they? Your website? Anything that you can give to make it easier for these people to get these documentaries if they're interested.
Our website is www.freemindfilms with an S, freemindfilms.com. And you can order the DVDs off of there. We'd appreciate that. We've got several prominent radio show hosts that are also selling our work on Infowars.com, the Power Hour with Joyce Riley, G. Edward Griffin, his website selling it. So that's if you want to contact me, just go ahead and basically contact at freemindfilms.com. Or Chris at freemindfilms.com. If you have any questions, comments, you want us to schedule a screening or possibly an interview, we'd love to have the opportunity to do so. And Ricky, I really want to thank you personally. I know this is the first time we've interviewed together, but it's radio show hosts like you that help us get the word out. And I can't thank you enough for at least, it's an honor to get contacted by you and to be on your show. And I want to commend you for the great work you're doing. So keep it up.
Hey, thanks, Chris. I really appreciate that. It's I think it's important for all of us to do our little part. I mean, this show's called The Ripple Effect because I truly believe that we can all create a little ripple and make a difference. I think that we want to believe, or they try to convince us, or that we can't make a difference, and I think that only helps them if we believe that. I think it's important for us to understand that even if just provoking thought or starting the conversation, just doing that alone goes a long way. And I think it's important to do that. I think it's important to tell people, if you watch a good documentary, share it, retweet it, do anything you can, and you'll be amazed by how much conversation it'll spark, and just from that conversation, how it'll change people's consciousness and how their outlook on the world, and the way these documentaries have done it in my life. I mean, we've all had documentaries that have kind of opened our eyes. Actually, before I let you go, that's a really interesting question, because I want to ask you that. Being a filmmaker and involved in documentaries, was there any documentary, like is there one that you remember that kind of blew your mind, the first one that kind of helped I guess change the way you looked at things?
Well, Dylan Avery, Corey Rowe, and Jason Burmis with the Loose Change film crew. I think their Loose Change documentaries really blew me away. Of course, Miss Valentine with the Waco Rules of Engagement. I've always been a filmmaker, or a film viewer, and I love documentaries because there was some substance. What makes me think about, in a critical sense, about the subject matter at hand. But really fostering a good friendship with the guys on Loose Change crew and seeing how they put their stuff together. Those guys are phenomenal. I mean, what they did, are you kidding me? How many, close to 32 million views on their films on YouTube? Who does that?
I had Jason Burmis on. He's an awesome guy, and you can hear his passion. It's like he reminds me. We talked about Alex Jones a little bit before we went on the air, about how some people can be turned off by how aggressive he is and stuff like that, or how emotionally involved he gets when he's telling the stories. But you know what? When you're consumed with this much information, and not just that, you're almost, sometimes I feel like Alex Jones probably feels like somebody who saw a ghost, but nobody believes that he saw a ghost. It's like he's saying, hey, we're all being fucking lied to. And then you have all these people who are like, oh no, you're just a conspiracy theorist. So I can see how that can aggravate you, and that can you can and he does want. We talked about this a little bit before, like how I'm a big Joe Rogan fan, and a lot of people listen to my podcast are also fans of Joe Rogan's podcast, and he has no incentive to say that Alex Jones is is putting on an act or not putting on an act. Joe Rogan's a pretty honest dude, and when he says that, hey, he really means what he says, then everybody who says, oh, he's putting on an act, guess what? If he says he isn't, I'm going to take his word for it. He knows him personally.
Sure.
He's been friends with him for a long time, and it's hard to believe that if you're telling all these stories and you're always focusing on the negative on the world, it's hard for you not to be emotionally involved when you know that there's lives at stake, when there's unjustified wars, when you're constantly researching this stuff. It's hard not to be passionate about it. And there's certain topics on my show also, and I'm sure that's you guys wanting to put out the truth, wanting to put out this information is probably a big motivation to, and knowing how many lives were lost unjustified with a noble eye. I'm sure that's a huge motivation to put out this film and keep going, and obviously Alex Jones, he's doing pretty well for himself now, but when he started this, a lot of people saw him as a lunatic. People saw him as crazy, and he wasn't doing it for the money. He created quite a little empire. But you know what? If he can make money and put out good information, then good for him. I'm happy for him. As long if your heart's in the right place and you do things because of your passion, or you want to put out some good information, and then if money comes with it afterwards, then that's a great thing. If you can do what you enjoy, and not just that, he's really making a difference. Because one of the Loose Change, it's funny because I ask a lot of other filmmakers that question, and Loose Change is definitely that film that I think kind of you feel like you're in the Matrix, and all of a sudden you're like, holy shit, everybody, I just I was given a blue pill and I realized everything's a lie, and that, and 9/11 Road to Tyranny by Alex Jones, that was one of the first ones I watched.
That's one thing I forgot to mention. Alex had, of course, he's got 23 films. My God, he's a phenomenal film writer and a filmmaker, and his staff does a wonderful job. We're good friends with at least 9 or 10 guys that work with him down there. They know us on a personal level and got their cell phone numbers in my cell phone, and we call them up anytime and talk. Yeah, Alex is amazing, and he helped, obviously, was a watershed of assistance to the Loose Change guys. But to this day, I can contact Jason or Dylan, I don't keep in touch with Corey that much anymore, and they're willing to help us out, and vice versa. That's what it's all about, man. We've got to, be there for each other, because obviously the mainstream media doesn't give a rat's rear end about us. So, yeah, I mean, those guys. There were times what I wanted to take before we actually got our film crew together, and with all the research I was doing when I moved here, there were times I wanted to chuck everything in the dumpster behind my apartment building because it was so mentally and physically overwhelming. I says, this is not the world that I grew up in. And it took me a while to realize, okay, we can do this. And it was, it talks with Jason at different conferences or Corey. They says, no, stick with it, man. Just stay focused, stay on point. You're going to do good. And I owe a lot to those guys. Same with Alex and his staff. They were just a wealth of encouragement. So I'll never end up, and bragging about those guys. They're great guys.
Yeah. He's done a lot for a lot of he's exposed me. I mean, besides his own films, he's exposed me to a lot of great films. And even though I was familiar with The Noble Eye, the first time I heard about State of Mind was I believe was one on Alex Jones talking about it and talking so highly about it. And I'm like, I got to check this out. And then when I found out it was the same filmmakers who did A Noble Eye, I figured it had to be good. So
well, thank you. Appreciate that.
Yeah. It's awesome. And you know what? I really appreciate everybody who takes the time and really puts their ass on the line to make these films that mainstream media is not going to back for the most part, and you might even be looked at in a different light too. You might be put the label of a conspiracy theorist or whatnot. So it's awesome that the message and the information is more important than maybe the backlash or any of that stuff that comes with putting out some type of a true story to what really happened with big events like this. So I think it's really important, and I think it's awesome that like you said, it's kind of a small community where everybody kind of helps each other out. I remember James Corbett. He was just on my show, but he was my very first guest ever, and I actually had him back, and I was telling him, I'm like, thanks,
James is phenomenal. The guy's brilliant. He's great.
Yeah, he's
really
an awesome guy, and I was telling him, like, James, I'm like, dude, you came on the show when I had like 4 episodes, and like you had no idea if it was gonna suck or if I was even gonna get past 4 episodes. You might be my first and only guest. I might just do this as a hobby and then decide I didn't want to do it. I'm like, and so I couldn't thank him enough for doing that. And this guy, I mean, he's probably one of the hardest working dudes on the internet. He's just constantly putting out information, podcasts. He goes on everybody and anybody's show. And he's just another wealth of information, and so it's awesome it kind of feels like a small family, and it's cool to be a part of a family where everybody's kind of their heart's in the right places and everybody's in for the same reasons. It's because they truly feel passionate about putting out good information and helping people become more aware of their surroundings, and that's the only way we're going to progress as people is getting the right information, knowing what's going on. I think it's way too easy for us to get caught up, and I do it. I mean, there's times where I get so caught up in everyday life, and just like yourself, working a job, a real not real job, but a full-time job, a shitty real full-time job that a 9-to-5 job, which we all have to do to a lot of us have to do to kind of just make ends meet. Like we can get caught up in that where we're just constantly in this cycle of going to work and then falling asleep, going to work, and you don't really have a lot of time to consume information and kind of do your own research and stuff. And that's why sometimes I get in conversations with people and people are like, oh, people just don't care about what's going on, or people they're dumb. And I'm like, yeah, but a lot of it is because we've created this lifestyle where we're just working our whole lives to buy shit we don't need, and we're being brainwashed, and we're just working overtime just so we can buy some car that we really can't afford, or buy some bigger house that we really don't need. And
that's where we get into the movie. You're right, Rick. You get into this vortex, and it's created by whether it be government agencies or advertising, and they're working in concert with each other. So if you could step back away from that vortex and say, you know what, I'm not going to get sucked into that. And it's easier said than done. Don't get me wrong, but it is possible. You take charge for your life, whether it be on your diet or your time, or just having time for yourself. And one of the best questions that I saw in that movie, of several hundreds of them, Eldon Taylor comes up and he says, "When was the last time you had an original thought?" That's what it's all about. I mean, you are original. You are a beautiful piece of work. You're an incredible temple of intelligence. Your mind and your body is amazing. And I'm not going to get into ethereal stuff here or spiritual, whatever. But it was a great question. He says, when was the last time you had an original thought? break away from the matrix or from the people that think that they have control over you, because you really have control over yourself is what it all boils down to.
Yeah, people are capable of such amazing things, and it sucks that we've just, we've created this lifestyle of just being machines. We just go to work, we do what we're told, and that's another thing you touch on in the movie is the whole idea of just learning how to just do what you're told and don't ask questions, and that starts right from our schooling and all that, and that's why I have such a problem with nationalism and being patriotic and all that stuff, because I feel like it separates us, and what it does, it causes us to just basically support a country even if it's wrong, or support the whole support the troops thing. This always drives me crazy, because it's like, wait, you want me to support the troops, but you're mad because I'm anti-war. Well, guess what? The most pro troops thing you can be is anti-war. My whole theory is, nobody should be losing their lives unless it's a last resort and it's necessary,
Right.
and you get these people that are, support the troops during the Iraq war and stuff like that. I'm like, I am supporting the troops by being anti this stupid war, and you meet people who, you talked about Ron Paul earlier in the show, and he got the most money from veterans and people in the military than anybody, and a lot of people in the mainstream media would talk about his foreign policy was too extreme. I'm like, it wasn't too extreme. I'm like, if it was so extreme, why were people who were in the front lines, people who've been to overseas and been shot at and stuff, why are they supporting his foreign policy? Because they understand it's all bullshit. This goes back to Wesley Butler, or what was his name? War is a Racket.
Smedley Butler.
Smedley Butler, yeah, and the whole idea of how war is just a big scam, and I just watched I didn't just watch, but it's not that old. The Untold History of the United States by Oliver Stone, another great films that let you see that our foreign policy has been bullshit, and it's usually, if not always, about strategy and tactics to try to keep other world powers in check, or corporations making money, and you look at what is it, the Economic Hitman, John Perkins's book.
Phenomenal piece of work. Yeah.
So
now you've got Paul Wittenberger with Why in the World Are They Spraying and What in the World Are They Spraying? A great filmmaker out of California. I mean, if anything else, if I were to stop making or working on films tomorrow, I would consider myself truly blessed by the other filmmakers that I've worked with, because we support each other. We give each other ideas. I mean, Paul lined us up, for instance, with the studio. We're going to have our actor do our voiceover in our third film. I mean, that is something that it would have been an extra challenge for me to do. But, filmmakers, they realize, look, this is my level of expertise. This is what I bring to the table. What can I do to help you out? And then it comes back tenfold. The support we give others, we're very blessed, whether it be unexpected or expected. It's unbelievable, and that's why we're here to do what we're doing, because at least we want to try to make even our slice of the world just a little bit better, and to leave something of a legacy that's positive, that's supportive for our kids. We're not going to be here forever, so what are we going to leave our kids? And as filmmakers, at least we can maybe give them the tools to think responsibly and think a little more intelligently, I guess, and then they'll have to go ahead and suffer the consequences, whether it be good or bad, on the actions they take. But we have to give them the tools to think with, and that's not happening in our education system today. So there's just a whole raft of reasons why we're doing what we're doing. I apologize, I do have to get wrapped up here. I've got another meeting to get to, but no, I'd love to come back on and we could talk more about maybe we can reverse the interview, talk more about what you do.
Would that
be ironic?
I'd love to. I love podcasting, I love music, I love documentaries, and that's usually the things I hit on a lot on this show. So I can't thank you enough, Chris. It was an awesome interview, so much information. Definitely go check out the movies, and support great film companies like Free Mind Films, and the sacrifices they make financially and with time and effort to put out these films, and so hey, thanks, Chris, and like I said, keep in touch. When I'll definitely keep looking out for that third film, and I'll definitely have you on again to talk about that.
All right, we'll get some contact information off the air. Thanks, Ricky.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks, Chris.